Hey, 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 it's another great day with the Crotchety Old Men podcast. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, regardless of what hemisphere you're in. Welcome to the podcast of the Crotchety Old Men podcast. I'm one of the co hosts, Gary Smith, and with me in the studio today is none other than my main man, Paul P.C. Clemens. What
Hey,
up,
hey,
Paul
hey, hey,
PC?
hey, what up, Doe?
Man, you know how
How
we
you
do
doing,
it.
Gary?
Oh man, I'm doing great, PC. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine, and I hope everybody out there that's listening to us is doing well as well.
Amen to that. Well, speaking of that, in that vein, hey man, we always talk about wealth and wealth building on this podcast with our attempts to help others, not only weather the storms of the financial world or what have you, but we both know, PC, that our health is our wealth. And so we don't want to get so out there, in one extreme where we don't balance this thing out called life, because you can have all the doggone money in the world, but if you sick, if your health is jacked up, that money don't mean nothing. So man, I'm just gonna toss it over to you, Paul, and let's kick this thing off, man.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Crotchety Old Men podcast, where every now and again we do get crotchety. So just bear with us. So just bear with us. Beans, good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you fart. That's what the old saying has been forever and ever and ever. The question is, are beans healthy? And why do you fart? And I've
Mm.
got some answers. And I tell you, what prompted us to talk about this podcast today is I was listening to another podcast of a brother who's quote unquote vegan, and, you know, how a lot of these podcasters pontificate about various things as it relates to food and health. And some of the things that he was talking about prompted me to do some research on the beans, just actually for myself.
Mhm.
And what I found out that some of the things that he was saying was true, and then there were some other things that he was saying that really needed to have some serious identification, which prompted this discussion. So here we go. What is a bean? According to him, a bean is an embryo. So why are we eating embryos? And of course, we do eat embryos for those of us who eat eggs, because that's exactly what an egg is an embryo.
Hold on, put some pause on those breaks right now, because a bean is an embryo. I mean, it may be shaped like one, but
So you have two different types of beans to look at. You have legumes and you have beans. Now there's very little difference in each one of them, because all beans are legumes, but all legumes are not beans.
Mhm.
It's like, if I could, you have a bird that's a peacock, okay, and then you have another group over here that are birds. Well, even though a peacock is a bird, all birds are not peacocks. So
Okay.
that's the way it goes. That's the way it goes with beans. And so, what are beans made of? Beans are made of highly complex proteins and acids. Now, the reason this brother was saying that beans were detrimental to your health is because of the phytic acid that's in the bean, the nitrogen that creates nitric oxide that's in the beans, and all of these produce the gas that creates you to become a funketeer and just funk up the place. But aside from that, beans can be very healthy if they're regulated. And one of the things that you mentioned, Gary, in this initial podcast was balance. And balance is the key to health. So let's talk about the bean. He's right. Phytic acids in the beans. There's nitrogen in the beans. All of these things produce, and then there's arginine. L-arginine is one of the 20 amino acid building blocks. And basically, what these chemicals do in the bean is to protect the bean. You have lectins in the bean that makes the bean bitter and nasty to taste. You get that same taste in a lot of unripened fruits. And what the lectins do is its nature's way, the bean's nature's way of defending itself against other natural predators that would otherwise eat it. Because remember, it's still an embryo.
Hmm.
And so the bean is going to sprout. Once the bean sprouts, now you have plants. This brother's conjecture was to say that, to eat the sprout is better than eating the bean. Well, that may or may not be true depending upon your health and where it stands now today, because the most important thing we have in our lives in terms of time is now. And
Amen.
so, we got to consider where our bodies are and what we need to do with the bodies and how the beings help.
So, PC,
Arginine,
may
go
I
ahead.
ask you? Let me interrupt just a minute. So,
Yeah,
actually, what is a bean? Is it a vegetable? Where do beans come from? There may be
that's
some
a
people out there that don't even know where the heck a bean come from. Where does
that's
beans come
that's a very good question, Gary. Beans are fruits.
from? Fruit?
Yes, any plant that bears a pod that has seeds in the pod are fruits. Think about fruits for that's a very good question. And a lot of people get tripped out about because you figure like this 600 years ago, when the Europeans started bringing vegetables into the country, there were certain restrictions on bringing in fruits because of the animals and the pests that are in the fruits. So what they did was they started establishing some fruits as vegetables so that they could get the fruits into the country. But anything that bears a pod or a nodule or whatever the case might be, that nodule or that pod, once it becomes full term, is a fruit. And that fruit has seeds in it, it has a stem to it. You can look at the thing. All our fruits have seeds and stems. Now they're starting the GMO fruits nowadays where they don't have seeds in it, but that's unnatural. You don't want to necessarily eat a fruit with no seeds because where is the origin of the fruit in the first place, and how has it been manipulated, which would be a question in the second place. But beans are fruits. They are
Hmm.
fruits.
Okay, very interesting. Y'all hear that? Because that's news to me. Because I always thought, or was made to believe, put it that way. I never even took the time to investigate it. That it was like your vegetables. The beans were vegetables, and most black people eat beans with greens and all that sort of thing. But go ahead, because this is
So
very
yeah,
interesting.
and I like you, Gary. I always thought that fruits were fruits and vegetables were vegetables, and until I had a class in plant biology,
Hmm.
was it clear to me that you have certain properties in these plants and fruits, and one of the main ingredients to a fruit is seeds and stem, and it grows from a plant that has come full term.
Okay, that explains it. Because I always skipped science. I couldn't stand science. So so now I understand why I don't know nothing about beans. Go ahead.
Right. So this brother was contending that the sprouting stage of a plant is the edible stage, which of course it is. The bean part of that plant, once it's taken from that plant, is an embryo, and it's in the embryonic stage according to plant biology. That doesn't necessarily mean, however, that bean doesn't have some nutritional value, which it does. His contention was that the bean creates a lot of disturbance in your gut, and it will because of the lectin that's in the bean. The lectin is the bean's way of not being consumed by other plants and by other animals. So it's going to create havoc in you, and the way it does that is by creating havoc in the gut, and it makes the bean is very hard to digest. He also contends that there's a lot of acids in the beans, but when you do your research, you'll discover that the acid in the bean is very low, 6.5. That's almost alkaline. Alkaline, anything 7 and above on the chart, on the pH chart, is alkaline. Anything less than 7 is considered acidic, and this is where you get your acidosis, which will kill you, and your alkalosis, which will also kill you. And you have either too much acid in your body or too much alkaline in your body. You can't survive on a totally alkalinic body, and you can't survive on a totally acidic body. So there's got to be a balance, and you want that balance at around 7.2, 7.3. It's a healthy balance. You still have some acid in your system to fire up your digestive system, so it'll do the work that it's supposed to do. Because we do. I mean, when you consider our bodies are already part acid anyway, with the RNA, which is ribose nucleic acid, which is a sugar acid. Anything with ribose in the word is considered to be a sugar or sugar product.
Well,
So
you know, oh,
go ahead.
no, I was just thinking here, and then I kind of, I sneaked a cheat. I cheated PC, so I'm confess now. I looked to Google. So this is not me being smart today. I cheated. I went to
It's
Google.
just you being Gary. You understand?
Just me being Gary, that inquisitive mind. I'm looking here. It says about a green bean. Raw green beans are 90% water, 7% carbohydrates, 2% protein. This is green beans. I mean, this is amazing to me. And so now, and of course, I'm not going to do it on this podcast, but I got to go down the list with the black beans, pinto beans, navy beans, northern beans, lima beans. Where do all these beans come from? And are there any nutritional value to them? I mean, I'm beginning to get confused here about beans and being healthy.
Beans is a very confusing subject, to be honest with you, because it's a very complex thing in the first place. Where
Hmm.
they come from. Um, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, beans were cultivated in the Americas. Peru, Mesoamerica. They're the ones that really cultivated the beans, and they're the ones that passed on bean cultivation to the Europeans. When the traders would come in to Mesoamerica, they would teach them this bean culture. They would take these beans back to Europe, and as Europeans do, they done turn the beans into something altogether altogether different from what the indigenous people had intended for those beans to grow. And so what they did, what the indigenous people would do, because a dried bean packed all this energy, you got to consider when you think in terms of culture, you look at the migration. It kind of tells you, migration tells you what people eat, how they build, and so forth and so on. So because um, during that time, 6,000 years ago, Mesoamerican, they traveled the land walking and whatever the case might be. So your food had to be energy packed. And the
Mm.
way that they carried the bean, because it was dry, it didn't need to be refrigerated, didn't need to be frozen, canned, or anything else. This was a convenient method for them to fuel their bodies for the great work that they had to do. They hunt, they fished, they walking across the America, from one place to from one end to the other. So that's why the bean was most important in Mesoamerica and Peru.
So it means that as somewhat of an energy source from for protein. If am I
It's
on the
packed.
right
Oh
track?
yes, it's definitely packed with protein.
Okay. So as opposed to eating chicken breasts, and for protein, a person could eat a cup of beans and have the same results. Or am I getting out there in the weeds now?
No, you're deep. You're deep in the weeds, my brother. No,
Okay.
no pun intended. You're deep in the weeds, and that's why vegans and vegetarians that get off of meat, beans are a very important aspect in your diet because they do provide protein other than leafy vegetables like kale and spinach specifically.
Okay.
Kale and spinach specifically have the same water content that you were talking about a little earlier.
Hmm.
They're 70, 80, 90% water. They have very little acidity in them, although spinach has more acidity than kale does. But they're packed with protein. One cup of those two greens is tantamount to a 6 to 8 ounce steak. The protein that you'll get out of a 6 to 8 ounce steak. Conversely, the beans, on the other hand, provide so much more protein than those leafy vegetables do because of what it's here for. It's here to procreate more plants.
Hmm.
So its makeup is made up so that it will procreate plant. The arginine, for instance, when we consume arginine, it expands our blood vessels so that it creates more blood flow. The lectins, once again, which protects it from being eaten by birds and insects and all that other stuff. It's high in nitrogen. Nitrogen expands and blows up things. You know what I'm saying? So you need that in a bean in order to make this shoot come out of the bean.
Hmm.
Okay. So when you eat that bean, you're eating those aspects as well.
So, what is a bean sprout? I've heard of that terminology. So, could you help with that? What is a bean sprout?
Sure, a bean sprout is a sprout that comes straight out of the bean. When the bean is planted in the dirt, there's a germination process that takes place between the heat and the nitrogen that's in the dirt. That's what's going to help make the bean pop open. When that bean pops open, there's a sprout that comes out of, and pardon my finger, but there's a
Yeah,
sprout.
did I say something?
There's a sprout that comes out of that bean and it creates that's the start of the plant being created where that bean has come from.
Okay. So now let's talk about the medicinal benefits of beans. I mean, do they really have any other than the protein part? I mean, can we do without bean in our diet?
You can if you substitute beans for something else.
Such
So
as
let's say, for instance, if you have a vegetarian or a vegan diet, well, the bean is most important at that point.
okay.
Um, if you are if you are B blood type, B blood type requires you to eat meat. Well, in a case of that nature, if you're eating meat and adding beans to the meat, that could create some serious digestive problems for you because bean, by it being a very complex seed, and it's hard for the gut to break it down. Okay. If you're A type, you really shouldn't be eating meat. So in that case, a bean is most important. The blood type that really needs to be careful is type O because you can either eat meat or not. And if you add beans in your diet to meat that's in your diet,
Mhm.
that can become very acidic. And as a result, it can be very difficult to break down in your body. And you'll have some serious gut issues as a result of it.
Hmm. So, I guess one could possibly deduct that because I'm thinking in terms of, there's some ethnic illnesses, what I call them. There's some
Indeed.
that are more prevalent with certain races than others, right?
Indeed.
And so I look back on 2020 when COVID raised its ugly head throughout the United States. And from what I can see, specifically in the Detroit area, and I believe I can stand to be corrected here, but in a vast majority of black neighborhoods throughout the country, whether it be Atlanta, Philly, DC, the neighborhoods, there was a high propensity of black people who caught COVID that proved to be fatal or have some long term ailments, side effects after, even if they did survive that COVID. And there are some who have pointed a finger and saying, well, it's the diet. It's because of our diet. And if you go through most urban communities, you rarely find fresh markets. You're going to find all the fried chicken joints, the hamburger places, the French fries places, and anything that's fried, dyed, and laid to the side is going to be there for black people to eat, to consume. And so my point being is that since there aren't very many fresh markets in most urban neighborhoods, and while there are some people beginning to grow their own foods, I can see clearly how we could be affected or impacted negatively by various viruses and illnesses that come through. Whereas people who have access to fresh vegetables and markets and things of that nature are able to protect themselves. Am I making
You are
sense there? I
making
mean,
perfect sense, and that's the crux of the whole issue when you look at diseases from a cultural level, which is not what Western medicine, has done. The
mhm,
model for Western medicine is a white man, and based on that white man's makeup and so forth and whatever, that's how they derive medicines. That's how they derive procedures and the whole thing. Our DNA is totally different from Caucasian DNA. And as a result of the difference between our DNA and their DNA, we react totally different to foods and the way foods are processed in particular than they are. For instance, they can consume large amount of salt because the salt content in their body is way more in their bodies than it is in ours, and substantially they can deal with substantially more salt than we can. The way our bodies are made up, salts lay waste to us in ways where we have high blood pressure, we have high kidney disease. Then you go into, okay, you have high blood pressure. What do? They give you a high blood pressure medication. What does that medication do? Well, it might lower the blood pressure, but it's wreaking havoc on your kidneys. And 15 to 20 years of taking a blood pressure medication, because of its high stress on the kidneys, you're going to be in dialysis. You're going to be in a dialysis shop, which I've noticed they've started building dialysis joints in the black neighborhoods that we had never seen before.
mhm. Oh,
And
absolutely.
that's because they recognize what happens to us when they put us on processed foods. So, in my opinion, and congruent to yours, there's no accident that all you see is these greasy spoons and fast food joints, and very little in the way of shopping centers where you can get fresh fruits and vegetables. Why? Because they have an agenda.
Well, yeah, that's quite obvious.
That's for another podcast, of course.
Right, right. There's no money in cures, only in treatment.
Exactly.
All right,
Exactly.
I think we know that. So it behooves one to be wise in terms of their intake of foods. I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was just the other day, and was talking about a merger and acquisitions of Hostess brand and Smuckers, I believe it is. And so, but the point I'm trying to make is that what really caught my attention was the revision or the reviving, if you will, of Twinkies. And one of the things that Hostess did in order to expand or improve profitability was that they discovered that the original Twinkie, when it was produced, only had a shelf life of 26 days. So that put a strain on supply chain issues. Well, they figured it out and said, well, hey, let's find some mold inhibitors. We're going to inject these Twinkies with some mold inhibitors and some enzymes. Well, again, I told you, I skipped science when I was a kid, so I don't know what the heck an enzyme is, but I know what mold is. And if you got an inhibitor, that sounds like it's a chemical of some sort to inhibit
Correct.
mold or to reduce mold. And then you got this enzyme that's put into a Twinkie. So now the shelf life of a Twinkie goes from 26 days to 65 days. Well, at the expense of profitability, you're telling me that in order, because America loves their Twinkies and donuts or whatever the heck you call that crap, and America love their sweets and their fattening foods. Now here you have not only that, but you have these enzymes and a mold inhibitor. All that is another chemical to prevent this doggone Twinkie from going bad, which it should go bad in 26 days.
Let me describe to you in the dictionary how they describe an enzyme.
Yes, please do.
Enzyme, a noun, a substance produced by an organism which acts as a catalyst to bring about a specific biochemical reaction.
Oh man, that's
Now,
like the dopamine.
exactly.
You crave
Well,
another.
dopamine is natural. We produce a certain amount of dopamine,
Okay.
but they have what they call tryptophan, which is an amino acid that catalyzes the dopamine that's lacking in our bodies. Well, what they're doing is an organism. What is an organism? Well, corn. Corn
Hmm.
is hard to digest naturally. Natural corn is difficult to digest. So, since capitalism is such that they genuflect to the god of profit, and let's just be real about it,
Mhm.
because you just mentioned it. Um, how do we how do we how do we how do we expand the shelf life of a thing? So what they've done with corn, they put a virus, injected a virus into the seed of the corn, and as the seed expands and grows, this virus grows with it, and this virus attacks what the elements that make the corn hard to digest. Okay. But now, nobody has talked about what that virus does to us in the meantime. You see, which kind of makes us vulnerable to a lot of different diseases anyway because of how they're manipulating the food in the first place.
Yeah, I think, but now the indigenous people, the Indians, seem like their diet was primarily surrounded by corn or something. Then they grew a lot of corn. They did a lot of things with Indian corn and
They
stuff like.
did.
And aside from the alcoholism part, I thought they were able. They had pretty long lives though. But that
Yeah, they did. And it's all a part of the cultivation process. If
okay,
you're naturally cultivating food, the
okay,
food's gonna be okay.
I
You
got
know, it's when you start manipulating the food and putting viruses and enzymes into stuff and trying to do this and do that. Come on now. Who doesn't know that bread spoils? And if you got a bread product that's sitting on the shelf 65 days or whatever the case might be, that should be a clear sign that that's something you do not want to imbibe.
you. So now, as we move forward here and helping our listeners, I mean, is it are we for? I shouldn't say are we for or against beans because you said there are some good. There's uses in beans, just like there are some good and bad in just about everything that's out there. Obviously, the default answer is that you use moderation. I hear all that all
Absolutely.
the time in moderation. But in terms of being able to not only maintain good health, good digestion, because what we're all trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, number one, is not spend all our money on cures and treatments and stuff, but in the name of pills and things of that nature. I mean, what good does it do you to acquire this wealth? And as the word says in the Bible, and then you lose your whole soul. Okay, and so hopefully, when you after people listen to this podcast, they'll be able to walk away with a semblance of like, hey, first of all, let me take control and let me participate in my own rescue. All right,
Exactly.
and that entails being mindful of what you put into your body, why you're eating it, and look for ways in which to extend your life and not leave it up to people, not just say others, who really don't care as much about your life as you should. All right.
Very diplomatically put, my brother.
because I don't like pointing fingers. Because anytime you point one finger at someone else, three is pointing back at you. You
True
see.
that.
So yeah, so we can always take a position of authority. We were given authority and power. It's called dominion when we first became into existence. So we have to use that power, authority, and dominion over what our temple. This temple that we live in is our temple. That's our world, basically. Okay, we
Indeed.
see everything else through the windows of our soul, through our eyes, but we are to control not only what comes into our temple in by the way of fuel, but we are to control what comes into our temple from sight as well as from hearing. Our guard, our ear gates, and our eye gates, so that way we'll make better decisions. All right. And so we can't fault someone else because we have high blood pressure. We can't fault someone else because we have a propensity to have higher kidney diseases. We
True
can't
that.
fault someone else, okay, because we have higher degrees of heart problems, okay. What we can do is participate in our own rescue by getting off our behind, okay. I'm not saying everybody got to join a gym, but doggone it, you can walk to the mailbox and back. Okay, you can walk to the corner. And if you can't, then you're gonna need to, that is a problem right there in and of itself. So I'm not going to elongate, all the things that we can do. We talked about some things that we shouldn't do, but before we end this podcast, PC, let's bring it home, man, as to what are the three things that maybe we can do collectively to maybe change this situation where we have like a food desert, you know, change this thing. Whereas that, we're eating all types of garbage knowingly that this stuff is not good. It tastes good. I hear people all the time go, oh, it tastes good. So doggone what? Okay. It tastes
Right.
good.
Right.
Will it die for taste? And
Right.
lastly, it all comes down to the monetization of it. You know, is there any way for there's a profit situation whereby we can grow our own food, supply our own food, and encourage these food markets or food courts, if you will, healthy food courts in and of these cities where you can have people from farm bringing food from farm to the table in a food court type of situation.
Absolutely. Here we go. As far as the beans were concerned, since we started with beans,
Yes.
best way to prepare beans is to soak them in hot water overnight.
Okay.
This gets rid of a lot of the chemicals that create nitrous oxide, which isn't bad for men, by the way,
Hmm.
for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
However, you want to get that gas and all of the things that are in that bean so that it's a little bit more palatable to your stomach and your gut.
Okay.
That's the one thing you can do about beans. Second thing is choice of bean.
Mm.
Um, the most healthiest bean to eat is a garbanzo bean or a chickpea. They're chickpeas.
Okay. Yeah.
Lentils is the next best. And then you go into adzuki beans, which is the next best. I'd say from there, black beans and black eyed peas are your next. So choice is very important. And study. We need to read. We need to read about these things and study what it is we can do for our health. As it relates to other things that we can do for our health, I would suggest growing our own vegetables and fruits and be mindful of where you're getting your seeds from
Mm.
because they are Monsanto's is probably one of the most a seed. Well, they don't produce seeds; they gather seeds, and they warehouse the seeds, and they genetically alter the seeds to where
Mhm.
the seeds don't grow anymore. They don't. They only produce that one time. There are no seedlings or podlings that are produced on the plant. So you got to be mindful about where you get your seeds. As it relates to monetary value, we had a guest on Malik Yakini. We had a guest on the show where he's growing a city full of plants, and the bakeries and so forth around the city of Detroit are buying his plants out of the garden over there, right off of River Rouge, right off the outer drive over there. That's where his farm is, and now he's got a food co-op that he's building on Woodward and Woodward and what is it, Canfield, I think it is. Um, it's a $2 million project. So yes, there are a lot of ways in which we can monetize this thing and do it healthy, without sacrificing our lives and our convictions.
All right, all right. Well, PC, we could talk about this topic here for until next week. But
Absolutely.
unfortunately, as they say, all good things sooner or later have to come to an end. Well, we're not coming to an end. We're just going to come to a pause on our podcast show.
Hello, there you go, there you go. And
But
I've got a good reading to close us out, Gary, if you
hey,
don't
man,
mind.
because that's going to be my next question. All right, go ahead, my brother, run it.
Name of this short piece is called Ripples. When you create a difference in someone's life, you not only impact their life, you impact everyone influenced by them through their entire lifetime. No act is ever too small. One by one. This is how we make an ocean rise.
All right, all right, all right. I love that. And look here, y'all. If you didn't know, now you
Now
know.
you know.
Look
Peace
here.
out.
Peace from the crotchety old men.
This is Dr. Paul Clemens with the Crotchety Old Men Podcast. If you're interested in financial tools to build wealth, and you're interested in ways to maximize your health through holistic alternatives, then you are just the audience that we're looking for. Tune in each week, every Thursday, to the Crotchety Old Men Podcast, where George Crumley, Gary Smith, and I offer you in-depth discussions on health and wealth. Subscribe to the Crotchety Old Men Podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your favorite podcast.